Believing that you're powerless doesn't empower anyone. But understanding that you're not in complete control can be the most freeing thing in the world. Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'm here to talk to you today about a really controversial topic. I'm going to start this out with a little quote. This is actually step 1 of 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says, "We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable." You know, I personally remember when I was first asked to say that step out loud in AA. It was actually in my first day in rehab. It was like the gatekeeper, the starting point, the secret code into the brotherhood to be allowed in, right? They had this huge poster, and I was in a group, and at some point, because it was they knew that I was brand new, they had me read the steps. And I got to tell you, from the first moment, I hated it. And I know that's a pretty common experience, so I don't think I'm brand new and I'm not revealing something that a lot of people haven't heard before, but I definitely didn't feel powerless. I mean, at the time, if I'm honest about it, I probably felt way more powerful, or almost all powerful. But even though I didn't feel it, and I didn't really relate to a lot of the steps that I read, it was required, so I said it. And that was just the first time, but I said it over and over and over. And then when my future sponsor walked me through the steps and he asked me to recall and work through the proof that I was powerless, I did it, and I found proof. And not necessarily because I believed it, but because I had to. And as a lot of us know, and there's huge research in psychology that shows this, you know, when you get asked a question, you're going to come up with an answer. So I kept doing it every time that I was asked. I would come up with the answer. And the thing is that over time, I was in AA for 3 years. Over time, it seeped in. You know, kind of like water. If you put water on really, really dry sand, it'll just seep in through the sand. It'll just disappear. It'll just become part of the sand. Or, you know, like every time there's a new Justin Bieber song on the radio and you hear it so many times in your head that 5 days later you're humming a Justin Bieber song and you have no idea where the hell it came from, it seeps in, right? And so over and over and over, as I was going to meetings, that phrase, "I'm powerless, my life has become unmanageable," kept going back and forth, in and out of my ears, So eventually, it seeped in. Even a few years later, when I was deep into graduate school and achieving some real success finally in life, powerless. That word just kept ringing out to me like a cannon in my head. I hated it. I always hated it. It made me feel wrong somehow. And the thing about it is it made me actually doubt other things in my life because, you know, it came with a lot of other sayings, but also if I'm powerless over this one thing, what else am I powerless over? What other things that I think I actually have power over do I not? And what am I thinking isn't right? And which of my choices in everyday life, like from what I want to eat to who I want to date, are screwed up? It was this constant mantra that was there, causing me to second guess and rethink so many things in my life. It became this constant noise in the background. And today, I want to talk to you about why I don't actually believe that anyone is powerless. Yes, even over alcohol. And why believing that you're powerless can actually screw up any real successful attempt at change. Now, we've written an article on this for Psychology Today. We put posts all around. I get that this is controversial, and a lot of people scream at me out loud and tell me that I'm responsible for having this. So let's start at the basics. Let's start with the meaning of what powerlessness is. So according to the dictionary, powerlessness is defined, or being powerless is defined as being without ability, influence, or power, and then it has some amazing synonyms. Being useless, defenseless, paralyzed, having no say. So powerless means zero. Zilch, nada, no influence, no effect, nothing. And here's the thing. I would argue that even that first day in rehab, and for anybody to find themselves standing in front of that first step, to walk into a meeting or to find a sponsor or to buy the book of AA, they just exerted power, right? I mean, they made choices to even get to that moment. Alcohol did not have the power over them to drive them to that decision, right? That makes sense. In my own story, I had to go through a lot to get to that place. My parents and I had to decide to hire a lawyer. We got rehab recommendations from somebody that lawyer worked with. I had to pack up. I got a ride from a friend. We drove to the rehab. I walked in. I set my stuff down in my room. I walked into that group. They asked me questions. I went and read. Like, each one of those is a choice. I could have always made other choices. That's where power comes in. And if alcohol was all powerful, and in my situation, let's say even drugs, if they were all powerful over me, they would have had control over me not being able to make those decisions. I exerted power all over the process. By the way, as further proof, because if you know my story, I got kicked out of that first rehab for relapsing, which some people would say, doesn't that prove that you're powerless? I was high when I walked into the second rehab. And if I had absolutely no power over my drug, how could I be high and make a decision to walk into a place that is actively trying to stop me from using? Is this making sense? So powerlessness means absolutely no impact. And I would argue that, again, we're all creating impact just by making the choices to even participate in the help. Now, there's definitely a difference between being powerless and being all powerful, right? Like I said, I probably believed that I had way more control and way more power when I first started this process. But if being powerless means zero control, being all powerful is like the exact opposite, right? It's the notion that I can do anything. I can exert my power in any way that I want and have complete and utter control of the outcomes and wield my will in a way that will absolutely guarantee a specific set of conditions and a specific set of behaviors to exist for me and for everybody around me. This came up for me when somebody gave me an example of why people are powerless over alcohol. And he used the example of a river. He said, you're powerless over the current in a river. And if you try to swim against stream, you'll get tired and eventually you might drown. But if you just turn around and coast with it, then you won't. And the example I gave him was, hold on, did you just say you could choose to turn around and swim with this current? Didn't you just make a choice? Aren't you just exerting power? Aren't you now making a choice to use the current to your advantage? But there's actually another choice somebody can make at any time. You can get the fuck out of the river. That's another choice. Swim to the side, get out, and now the water has no power over you. Again, making choices is the practice of power. Yes, you cannot turn the current around. You don't have all the power in the universe. You're not Hulk. You're not Superman. But that doesn't mean you don't have any power. We have to recognize where we're powerful and where we're not. Ignoring or completely writing off one for the other isn't helpful. It weakens us. It makes us dependent. And that, yes, helps if what you're trying to do is make sure that people keep coming back to your group, but not if what you really want them to do is become independent and in control of their own life. I want to be clear. I have a lot of power, but I am not all powerful. I have a pretty good amount of control over my own actions, but not always over the results. We've talked about this in previous episodes. I have a little bit of influence over other people, right? Like over my kids, I have a lot of influence. Over my wife, not that much, if you know us. Over random friends, I have some, right? Like if I ask my friend if he wants to come out one night, I could influence him to go to a restaurant that he wouldn't have gone to otherwise. That is some control over other people's behavior, but it's not very predictable. And unless you really want to manipulate people, then they get to have control over their own actions too. Now, when I bring this up, to me, everything that I've set up to now doesn't really seem all that controversial in my opinion, in my head. There's an episode with Sherry Gaba coming up where we talked about this concept as well. And this is a really troubling concept for a lot of people because they've gotten used to that language for so long. They've heard that damn first step so much. They've been accepting the notion that people are powerless for so freaking long. They just don't know what to do with an alternative explanation. So then they create these ways to bridge the gap. They have tricks. Like one of the responses I get a lot of people is admitting you're powerless is a paradoxical thing. Once you admit that you're powerless, you can actually get empowered. And I go, why are you making people jump over hurdles just to walk back? Why are you making people pretzel themselves into admitting something they don't want to admit just so you can drive another point home? Why not make the point from the first place, which is, hey, guess what? You're not all powerful. You think you can control your drinking the way you want to? Hasn't quite worked out, right? So obviously you're not 100% in control of this thing. Why not just make the easy leap, lower the threshold, make the hurdle smaller, make it easier for people to jump through the hoop? I don't understand why we're trying to confuse people if it is really paradoxical. I don't think it is, by the way. I think a lot of people believe the powerlessness explanation verbatim as it's stated. A second bridge, a second little trick that people use sometimes is they say, well, step one is about humility. For somebody to walk in, kind of like me, right? That guy, as I mentioned, that felt like he was all powerful, this drug dealer with money and blah, 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 whatever. We got to put him in his place. I get why that feels right, especially for the people who treat addicts and people who struggle with addiction and alcohol and drugs and sex or whatever. I get why it feels like a good explanation, because it seems like there's been so much wreckage. Those people have to pay a price now. But can we admit that by the time somebody walks in to get help, they feel pretty crappy about themselves already? Yes, there might be the facade of I'm bigger than everybody else, I'm amazing. But nobody walks into a meeting, nobody walks into a therapist's office, nobody calls me to get help or get on one of my programs or buys my book because they think they're doing great. So are we really, as helpers, saying that when people come in feeling like crap about themselves, our job is first and foremost to make them feel worse about themselves? I think that's pretty stupid. And then the third problem is this. We know from research that when people are made to say things about themselves and others, and when they are in an environment that supports those notions about them, there's a bias that gets created. There's so many names for it. My TEDx talk talked about the Pygmalion effect and expectancy bias. There's so many names. The observer expectancy effect. There's so many different names for this thing. But we know that if I make somebody believe they're powerless, they will be more powerless. They will act in a way that is more powerless as an implicit bias. And so what is happening in these rooms is you get a bunch of people to believe that they're powerless, surrounded by other people who believe that they are powerless, and you get this massive groupthink bias that makes everybody in the room really feel powerless and act in ways that prove that they are powerless. And so I have a completely different point, and I want you to pause for a second and listen to this. Believing that you're powerless doesn't empower anyone. But understanding that you're not in complete control can be the most freeing thing in the world. Let me say that again. Believing that you're powerless doesn't empower anyone. But understanding that you're not in complete control can be one of the most freeing things anywhere. In my own story, I got to reclaim my power. About 2.5, 3 years into my recovery process, I started a conversation with a lot of people around me, my parents, my sponsor at the time, my friends, my girlfriend. And I said, I don't think this fits who I am. I'm going to run the experiment. I'm going to try a different path. I didn't do it haphazardly. I didn't just jump into it. I talked and I reasoned and I looked at research and I had more conversations, and we kept talking about it over and over and over. And then about 6 months into that process, I took what was a really scary leap. I tell the story before, but I didn't know if they were right. It just felt like they were wrong. And so my girlfriend and I at the time, we were sitting down. She had a glass of champagne. She was a normie, the way everybody explained at the time. I think we're all, almost all at least, normies. I took a sip of the champagne. I put it back and I just sat back because I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I'm going to be smoking meth again in some random room tomorrow or next week or next month. So I took one sip and I took a break. I want to tell you, I'm still a social drinker going on 14 years, and it's never an issue. And yes, if you're wondering, I've been drunk during those times. We've gone to weddings. I've had 3, 4, 5 drinks at a time sometimes. But here's the thing. Nothing else in my life has been affected. What I was told in the rooms all the time was that alcoholics, I'm putting that in air quotes, or addicts in air quotes, are different than normies. That might be true or might not be true, but I was absolutely being told at the time that I was one of those addicts who was powerless and out of control. And I haven't run back to use meth once. And to make matters even worse for some of you who are thinking, yeah, but you were a meth addict, not an alcoholic, I have an Adderall prescription for my ADHD. If you looked at the bottle that I have, it's from 2 years ago. I got a month prescription for Adderall 2 years ago, and I'm still not done with it. Why? Because I am not powerless. I'm not powerless over the medication. I'm not powerless over the chemical. As I talk about with people all the time, the argument is just moot. It's empty. And I got to tell you that the idea that I'm powerless is proved to not only be not true for me, but for hundreds of people that I've worked with. And the thing is that by taking back my own power, I was actually able to teach myself that I'm in control over more than I was led to believe, but not as much in control as I wish that I had been my entire life. Here's the thing, I get to be realistic and empowered at the same time, and I think that's a really good place to be. But I think there's an even bigger takeaway. By being empowered and acknowledging both my strengths and my limitations, I get to confront and address all the other things in my life that really matter. My relationship, my need to fit in and belong, my anxieties, my childhood issues, and my biological deficits of focusing and paying attention and memory. Because if we're honest about it, all of us listening right now, my addiction and every addiction out there was never about the addiction itself. This is one of the biggest lessons I teach everybody who reads my book or takes my programs or gets coaching with me. My addiction was about my inability to deal with the real struggles in my life, and a lack of understanding and tools for coping, and feeling like I'm powerless is not going to help me ever truly address those things. That, by the way, is why I call my program the Ignited Hero Program, because I see those of us who made it this far as heroes. Those of us who walked through everything we had to get through in our lives and then walk in and ask for help, we're heroes. It just takes a little bit of work and sometimes help for us to actually see that. So, you're not powerless. You've never been powerless, but you're also not Superman, and I think you know that. Now the question is, if you know somebody who's struggling with this, or if you are struggling yourself, how are you going to exert your power? How are you going to take back control? What are you going to do in your life to start claiming back the right to live the life you want? If you know somebody, share this with them, screenshot, tag me on any social media platform, and let me know what really resonated. I love having you guys on board. Keep sending me requests for what it is that you want me to talk about, and I will follow through for you. Have a great, great weekend, and we will see you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.